One day, not very far from now, people will look back at our time and say, it was all already written, but almost no one noticed. They will wonder how entire generations could pass through events of great spiritual weight while treating them as simple traditions, beautiful feasts, or poetic devotions. On December 8th, we celebrate the Immaculate Conception. For many, it is simply a Marian feast day, a procession with candles, a mass that passes by quietly, a few distracted Hail Marys said out of habit rather than conviction. But beneath this familiar surface lies a detail almost no one connects, a detail that is not sentimental, not secondary, not symbolic, but profoundly prophetic. The mystery of the Immaculate Conception is tied to two places on earth, Lourdes and Fatima. Two small, almost insignificant locations that become the axis of a prophecy touching the future of the entire world. A remote grotto in Lourdes, a forgotten village called Fatima, and a message that resounds with a strange certainty. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. What does that mean? What does the Immaculate Conception have to do with the collapse of nations, with Russia, with the wars we see erupting again and again, with the crisis of faith that seems to suffocate our century? And more importantly, is this triumph only a poetic spiritual promise? Or is it something already unfolding around us silently, without us realizing it? To understand this, we must begin with a truth that many Catholics, even devout ones, often misunderstand. Many people think Immaculate Conception means that Jesus was conceived without sin. But that is the mystery of the Incarnation. The Immaculate Conception is something else entirely. It means that Mary, from the very first instant of her existence, was preserved, prevented from contracting original sin. In simple terms, while every human being is born with a wound in the soul, an inclination toward selfishness, rebellion, darkness, Mary is not. Not because she deserved it, not because she earned it, but because God, looking ahead to the merits of Christ's sacrifice on the cross, applied those merits to her at the moment of her conception. He saved her before she fell, the way a person might prevent someone from tumbling into a pit rather than pulling them out afterward. Mary is the only human being who lived her entire life, from beginning to end, without ever being touched by sin, not even for a fraction of a second. That is why we call her immaculate, without stain, without shadow, without the slightest compromise with evil. This truth was proclaimed officially by the Church on December 8, 1854, by Pope Pius IX. But if this dogma is so essential, so foundational, why does God, only a few years later, choose not to explain it through theologians or cardinals, through scholars or bishops, but through an illiterate girl in a remote rocky grotto? It is 1858 in Lourdes, in the south of France. A 14-year-old girl, Bernadette Soubirous, is poor, asthmatic, uneducated, unable even to read the catechism properly. She does not know theology. She does not know the definitions of dogmas. She does not engage with the intellectual movements of her time. She is a child who goes to gather firewood. One day, near the grotto of Massabielle, she sees a lady appear. The lady smiles at her with a tenderness that disarms, invites her to pray, calls her to penance for sinners. The apparitions continue, and the parish priest, cautious and prudent, instructs Bernadette, "Ask her her name. We cannot believe in a beautiful lady without knowing who she is." Bernadette obeys. During one of the apparitions, she asks timidly, "Lady, would you be so kind as to tell me your name?" The lady does not respond immediately. She waits. Then, at another apparition, she looks toward heaven, folds her hands over her heart, and says in the local dialect, "Que soy era Immaculata Conception." I am the Immaculate Conception. Bernadette does not understand the words. She repeats them to herself the entire way back so she will not forget them. She bursts into the presbytery and repeats them to the priest exactly as she heard them. The priest turns pale. This phrase, this theological definition, had been proclaimed as a dogma only 4 years before. There was no way this child, with no schooling and no theological background, could have invented it. It it was precisely this detail, a dogmatic formula on the lips of an uneducated girl, that convinced the Church that these apparitions were not illusions or fantasies. It was as if heaven itself were confirming, "You have proclaimed a dogma, now I will show it to you in history." Mary was not just confirming a truth, she was declaring her identity. She was saying, "This is not secondary. This is who I am. This is the key to everything that will unfold in the final phase of history." And with this declaration, the next chapter begins. Fatima, 1917. The world is on fire. Europe is at war. Entire nations tremble. In a hidden village in Portugal, 3 shepherd children, Lucia, Jacinta, and Francisco, tend their sheep. Poor, innocent, untouched by the complexities of world politics, they are chosen, much like Bernadette, to witness something that will change the course of the 20th century. On May 13, 1917, a lady brighter than the sun appears to them. She does not immediately declare herself as the Immaculate Conception, but she draws them with a love that feels both maternal and divine, with a gravity no human voice could imitate. She speaks of prayer, sacrifice, conversion. But then something profoundly strange. She speaks of Russia, a nation the children have never heard of wars that will spread, of errors that will poison cultures, governments, and minds across the planet. And she presents the antidote, the rosary, reparation, consecration to her Immaculate Heart. And then she says the words that echo through generations, "In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph." The Immaculate Heart is not simply Mary's personal purity. It is God's strategy for this era of history. God sets before the rising tide of evil a woman untouched by sin, a heart without corruption, a refuge for those who do not wish to belong to darkness. At Fatima, Jacinta receives a vision, a pope suffering greatly, praying while crowds hurl insults and stones, a pope weeping over wars and souls being lost, and Mary's Immaculate Heart deeply united to his suffering. She gives no name. But decades later, the popes begin to meditate on the message of Fatima, and some sense in their hearts, "This concerns me." When John Paul II survives the assassination attempt of May 13, 1981, on the feast of Our Lady of Fatima, he later says, "One hand fired the bullet, another hand guided it." He attributes his survival to the Immaculate Heart. Pope Francis, by consecrating Russia and Ukraine, reaffirms that we are still inside the prophecies unfolding. These events are not medieval legends. They have shaped modern history before cameras in diplomatic developments within church life itself. Yet people today ask, if Mary promised triumph, why do we still see war, hatred, chaos? Because triumph does not mean an earthly paradise. It means a victory of grace in souls, the rise of Christians who, despite weakness, cling to God and Mary. It is the collapse of ideologies and godless systems that seem powerful but are ultimately dust. When Mary speaks of Russia spreading errors, she refers not to a nation alone, but to a worldview without God, a belief that humanity can create paradise without the Creator, and inevitably builds new forms of hell. The triumph happens when one heart turns back to God. That is how God transforms history, quietly, invisibly, one soul at a time. Pope Pius XII himself once witnessed a phenomenon in the Vatican gardens resembling the miracle of the Son of Fatima. Why would God allow this? Not for spectacle, but to awaken consciences. The time of grace is now. The truth is that while we watch the headlines about wars, popes, and nations, each of us is fighting an invisible war inside. And this is where Lourdes and Fatima move from global to personal. It is not enough to say, "What a beautiful feast the Immaculate is." One must decide whether to live with Mary or merely mention her occasionally. The world is collapsing under the weight of sin, selfishness, violence, a spiritual virus that infects humanity. But God created the Immaculate precisely to break this cycle. She is not a statue. She's God's strategic instrument. Evil has no foothold in her, and therefore she is capable of crushing it. The future depends on her, because only a heart free from evil can interrupt the spiral of destruction humanity creates. Without the Immaculate, the world repeats its mistakes. With her, there is a way out. And now the question falls upon each individual. Which side do you choose? Will you live as a frightened spectator of history, or as a child taking refuge in a mother's heart? If you have listened this far, consider making a concrete act of faith. Write one simple line: Immaculate Heart of Mary, I trust in you. This is not superstition. It is choosing a side, choosing light over darkness, choosing hope over fear, choosing the Immaculate Heart. In every era of human history, God invites the world to conversion through signs that appear small, hidden, almost insignificant to the powerful, but radiant to the humble. Yet never has this invitation been as urgent, as penetrating, or as direct as it is in our time. The story that begins in the quiet grotto of Lourdes and unfolds in the vast fields of Fatima does not end there. It continues into our century with new layers of meaning, fresh urgencies and consequences that reach across nations, cultures, and consciences. The pattern is always the same. God chooses the small to confront the mighty, the poor to challenge the proud, the pure to disarm the corrupt. And in this story, the Immaculate Heart of Mary is not presented as a soft devotional symbol, but as a luminous force that stands at the center of a spiritual battle shaking the world. Many people today feel a deep exhaustion with the world, constant wars, societal collapse, moral confusion, the corrosion of families, and an anguish that sits quietly inside the human heart. What the world calls progress seems often to lead to a deeper emptiness, more division, more loneliness. Even believers feel overwhelmed, as if faith itself is being swallowed by the noise of the age. But in the very midst of this crisis, something else is rising. A quiet movement of hearts drawn toward purity, prayer, sacrifice, and a deeper awareness that humanity cannot save itself by its own power. This is the unseen preparation for the triumph Mary foretold. When Mary said, "My Immaculate Heart will triumph," she was not speaking of a political victory or a global revolution led by force. She was revealing a divine plan where God purifies the world not with fire and punishment, but with grace and transformation. Lourdes cleanses through healing and humility. Fatima awakens through warning and conversion. And our present moment invites through decision and courage. There is a reason why Mary appears repeatedly to children. Their purity mirrors her own. Their humility opens the gates of heaven in places where adults build walls. It is the same purity the world mocks, the same innocence the world tries to erase. Yet it is this very innocence that becomes the seed of the triumph. When we examine history through this lens, we begin to see how the 20th and 21st centuries, with all their chaos, are spiritually coherent. Wars erupt not only from political tensions, but from hearts that reject God. Ideologies spread, not because they are logical, but because souls are empty. The crisis in the Church is not merely administrative. It is a spiritual shaking meant to sift faith from convenience, authenticity from appearance. The world is going through a purification, not to destroy, but to awaken. And in this purification, the Immaculate Heart stands like a lighthouse in a storm, silent, bright, unmovable. That is why Marian devotions intensify in times of crisis, why millions still go to Lourdes, why Fatima draws pilgrims from nations that once persecuted the faith, why consecrations to the Immaculate Heart rise precisely during moments of global instability. Heaven is quietly gathering souls who will form the remnant, a people not defined by power but by fidelity. What we see around us, societal confusion, loss of identity, global conflict, is not the failure of Mary's promise, but the battlefield on which the promise will be fulfilled. The triumph is not delivered into a peaceful world, but forged in the ruins of a wounded one. And so, the triumph begins where hearts surrender. In the homes where families pray again, in the young people who choose purity against the current, in the priests who remain faithful, in the hidden souls who suffer silently for the salvation of others, in every act of trust whispered to heaven amid personal darkness. When Mary speaks of conversion, she is not speaking only of sinners turning to God. She is speaking of the world learning again how to love. This is the kind of victory the Immaculate Heart brings. A victory that does not humiliate enemies but transforms them. A victory that does not crush nations but heals them. A victory that does not dominate minds but illuminates them. And so, the story of Lourdes and Fatima moves forward through us. It demands that each of us choose whether to allow this triumph to begin in our own hearts, whether to let grace defeat the shadows within us. If Lourdes shows us Mary as the Immaculate Conception, and Fatima shows us her Immaculate Heart wounded yet ready to triumph, our time reveals the bridge between them, the purification of humanity through love stronger than sin. In this light, every prayer becomes part of a cosmic strategy, every sacrifice part of a vast spiritual rebuilding, every act of faith a stone laid in the foundations of the coming victory. And though evil appears louder, though the world trembles under the weight of confusion, though discouragement whispers to the faint-hearted, the truth remains unchanged. Darkness is only an absence of light, and where the Immaculate Heart enters, darkness dissolves. That is why the story continues in us. That is why Mary calls so insistently. And that is why, beneath all the fear of our times, there is a hidden hope rising like dawn. The triumph of the Immaculate Heart is not merely a future event, but a present invitation, an unseen reality already at work beneath the surface of the world. While many wait for miracles written in the sky, heaven is working miracles in silence, miracles of conversion, forgiveness, healing, and transformation in ordinary hearts. The triumph begins when a sinner returns to confession after years away, when a family reconciles, when a young person renounces temptation for the sake of purity, when a mother prays the rosary with her children despite the weight of daily exhaustion, when a soul chooses love in a moment when anger would be easier. These are the victories that dismantle evil from within. Mary is not building an earthly kingdom. She is building a kingdom of transformed hearts, and each transformed heart weakens the foundations of darkness across the entire world. In this way, every soul becomes a battlefield and a sanctuary at once, a place where God's grace contends with the shadows of human weakness.
That is why the triumph is slow. It respects freedom. That is why it is hidden. It grows like seeds beneath the soil, and that is why it is unstoppable.
Nothing built on sin can withstand the light of a heart that has surrendered entirely to grace. When humanity finally understands this, it will look back at our age with amazement, recognizing how close we were to the edge, how deep the wounds of our time were, how fragile peace truly was, and yet how mercifully God intervened through the Immaculate Heart. The world may not yet see it, but the triumph has already begun in the rising renewal among believers who rediscover the power of grace, in the small communities rebuilding faith, in the youth who return to prayer after generations of spiritual emptiness, and in the silent monasteries whose prayers uphold the world. Even the apparent unraveling of society forms part of the divine plan. God allows certain structures to collapse so that hearts might awaken. He permits crises so that souls may finally look upward. The shaking of nations mirrors the shaking of consciences, and in this shaking Mary stands as a mother who does not flee from chaos, but enters it to gather her children. Her heart becomes a place of refuge, a shelter for the weary, a school of courage for the faint-hearted. In her heart, fear is replaced by peace, confusion by clarity, despair by hope. Her heart is the ark in the flood, the star that guides through the night, the garden where God Himself restores what sin has broken. And so, as we move toward the conclusion of this long journey through prophecy, history, and grace, one truth emerges with luminous certainty. God has not abandoned the world. He is purifying it. He is calling it. The soul learns that true spiritual growth is not fast or dramatic, but slow, steady, almost imperceptible, much like how dawn slowly overcomes the night, until suddenly the whole horizon is filled with light. In this gradual illumination, God trains the heart to see differently, to recognize His presence in hardship, to perceive His wisdom in silence, to accept His timing even when it feels unbearably long, and to trust that He works with greater precision than we could ever comprehend. Life's many storms, once feared, begin to appear as sacred opportunities, moments where divine strength replaces human frailty, where grace fills the cracks created by grief, and where spiritual sight becomes clearer because earthly certainties have been stripped away. The soul begins to understand that God is closest not only in blessings but also in the breaking, not only in joys, but also in the dark valleys, where faith must walk without visible support. And in this understanding, a profound peace emerges, a peace that surpasses the shifting circumstances of the world. It is the peace that comes from knowing that God sees the entire path, even when we see only the next step, that He holds both the battle and the victory in His hands, that His love does not waver when our emotions do, and that His purpose is never defeated by weakness, confusion, or delay. Slowly, the heart learns to rise above its fears and to rest in divine providence, trusting that what appears as loss may be the doorway to deeper transformation. The soul becomes aware that nothing God allows is without meaning, and that even the moments that feel like endings may actually be hidden beginnings where His grace takes root. In this sacred awakening, the believer begins to walk with a steadier rhythm, breathing more fully in the presence of God, becoming more attuned to the subtle movements of the Holy Spirit. Each day becomes an offering, each struggle a prayer, each step a quiet act of fidelity. And as the inner life deepens, gratitude flows more naturally, flowing not only from blessings received but from the very awareness of being continually held by divine mercy. Gratitude becomes a way of seeing, a way of living, a way of responding to everything that unfolds. Even in moments of uncertainty, the heart begins to say, "Lord, if you are here, then this is enough for me." It is a profound shift where the soul no longer seeks control but seeks communion, no longer demands answers but desires union with God's will, no longer clings to earthly assurances but anchors itself in eternal truth. And as this transformation unfolds, a gentle strength rises, one that is not born of human effort but of grace working patiently, quietly, faithfully within. This strength allows the soul to face trials with courage, knowing that nothing can separate it from the love of God. It empowers forgiveness where there had been bitterness, hope where there had been despair, and compassion where there had been indifference. The divine light begins to shine through the heart in small but unmistakable ways, through the tenderness with which we speak, the patience with which we endure, the mercy with which we approach others. In this slow but steady purification, the soul becomes more like Christ, reflecting His gentleness, His humility, His unwavering trust in the Father. And through this transformation, the believer becomes a living witness, not necessarily through words, but through the quiet beauty of holiness that flows from a heart touched deeply by God. It is in these moments of transformation that the veil between heaven and earth seems thinner, and the soul understands more clearly that it was created for eternal communion, not temporary comfort. The desires of the world begin to lose their grip, replaced by a greater desire to love, to serve, to surrender, to live for God alone. Even the wounds that once seemed unbearable transform into pathways of grace, reminders that God can bring beauty out of brokenness, healing out of sorrow, and new life out of what once felt lost. And as these truths settle deeply into the soul, a quiet confidence forms, the confidence that God's timing is perfect, His ways are higher, His love is unfailing, and His presence is constant even when we feel nothing. The spiritual journey becomes not a burden but a gift, not an obligation but a privilege, not a struggle for perfection but a deepening relationship with the one who loves us beyond comprehension. And in this sacred relationship the soul finds its home, its true resting place, its refuge, its hope, its purpose. Every fear, every worry, every unanswered question melts slowly into the trust that God is enough, that His mercy is infinite, that His guidance is sure, and that his love remains the foundation upon which the soul can safely build its life. Thus the journey continues, one step at a time, one grace at a time, until the heart becomes fully aligned with the heart of God, and the believer begins to live not by sight but by faith, not by fear but by love, not by striving but by surrender, trusting that God will complete the good work he has begun. In this deep union, the soul whispers its final prayer of the day, Lord, remain with me, guide me, purify me, strengthen me, and let your holy will be my peace. And in this surrender, the journey continues toward the fullness of divine love. Amen.